A new start for Afghanistan after the US brings its 20-year war there to an end. But what happens next? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidoo, and this is The Heat. For the first time since the end of 2001, Afghans are starting over without a US military presence in their country. And as the Taliban consolidates its power and sets about forming a new government, a spokesman for the group offered assurances Tuesday to those concerned about how they will rule.
We want our residents to have no concern. Afghanistan is our common home. We will stay here. We should not escape and have no fear. Secondly, if people want to leave to choose a secure life, then we will facilitate it for them, but in a legitimate way. They should have a visa, and they can fly through the airport.
Now, for the latest on the situation on the ground in Kabul, we are joined by CGTN correspondent Samaralai Abbasin. Samaralai, thanks for joining us. It is early Wednesday morning in Kabul. What has the first full day been like there now that the Americans are gone?
Hello, Anand. This is the second day where there is no U.S. boot on the ground, and all the U.S. Diplomatic and also military personnel are already out of the country. The situation on Tuesday was much different than the days before, particularly comparing to those 18 days chaos at Kabul airport, and also bloody attack by the SKP inside. That was a day for a mix, full of mixed feelings and reactions. For the Taliban, it was an Independence Day, a celebration day, and also affiliated to Taliban also celebrated and congratulated this day, while other inspired by the Taliban also were celebrating, and many other people. On the other hand, for several more, it was a beginning of the hard days economically, politically, and also socially, because Afghanistan has been facing a lot of troubles from now on. The banks are still not working properly, the economy is looming, and also prices soaring all around the country, while raw materials, medicine, and much more for a simple life is lacking all around the country.
Now, what can you tell us about efforts to form a new government? What are the Taliban saying about that?
Well, Taliban are much busy about forming a new government, because they already know that everything is now interconnected to the new government. The Taliban say the new government should be under Sharia law, and a new Islamic state should include all the ethnics, political parties, and everybody in its formation, while their supreme leader, Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada, has been to southern Kandahar province. They had 3 days meeting intra-Taliban, or the Taliban leadership council meetings. They talked about the inclusive government, the economy, the social life, and everything related to Afghanistan future and belong to Taliban leadership. At the same time, there were meetings Tuesday in different parts, particularly a meeting between the ulama, or the religious leaders, the academics, and elite of the society inside Kabul. Afghanistan National Radio Television conference followed. While on the other hand, Panjshir is still a challenging issue. The Taliban say they will solve the issue, but there are reports from the resistance that Taliban attacked some parts of the Panjshir Valley. They have entered to the road of Panjshir now inside, and also the resistance claimed that the Taliban tried and they killed at least 8 Taliban, but they were avoided to enter Panjshir Valley. So it's all related to each other, but the Taliban seems to be very much serious about formation of a new government, which could be recognized by international society, and it would have legitimacy.
Okay, thank you very much. That's CGTN correspondent Zamaralai Abbasin talking to us from Kabul. Well, there is a lot to talk about. And joining me here in Washington is Omar Samad. He is a former Afghan ambassador to France and Canada. With us too is Michael O'Hanlon. He is a senior fellow and director of research in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution. Also joining us from Bangkok is Mohammad Naciri. He is regional director for UN Women for Asia and the Pacific. And with us from Beijing is Qinduo Xu. He is a senior fellow at the Pangoal Institution and the host of CGTN's Dialogue Weekend. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being with us. Ambassador Omar Samad, US troops have left Afghanistan and now the country looks to the future under a Taliban government. On the first day of what the Taliban is calling an independent Afghanistan, this is what its spokesman had to say. Let's listen.
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan wants good relations with the Americans through diplomacy. However, the Americans failed here. They failed. From the military perspective, they failed to achieve their goals. But the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan wants to have good relations with the whole world on behalf of the nation. We want to have strong diplomatic relations with all, including the United States. We want to gradually re-establish good relations with the United States in the future.
So, Ambassador, what are your expectations? Do you expect there to be some kind of inclusive government, or will it be back to the Taliban of old?
At this point, it's not very clear. The three-day meeting in Kandahar with the spiritual leader in attendance, apparently, obviously is important. We do not have details of what they have decided. I think that this is where they were going to agree to some type of power sharing. We don't know if the power sharing is going to take place at the higher level of government, meaning the ministries and the governorships and the embassies, or whether it's going to be at the second level of deputy ministers and director generals and so on and so forth as part of the bureaucracy. What we do know is that there is a lot of talking going on, has been going on for a couple of weeks now between the Taliban and other political stakeholders in Kabul mainly, and there's a lot of messaging that goes back and forth. And the Taliban understand that not only do they have to embrace and find legitimacy within Afghanistan with Afghan constituencies, but they also need to find legitimacy in the region, around Afghanistan, and beyond. So that message has been very clear, even by President Biden today, Secretary of State Blinken yesterday, the G7 the other day, and many others around the world, that they expect some kind of a power-sharing arrangement in Afghanistan.
Michael O'Hanlon, great to have you with us. President Biden addressed the withdrawal from Afghanistan earlier on Tuesday from the White House. Let's listen to part of what he had to say.
So we were ready when the Afghan security forces, after 2 decades of fighting for their country and losing thousands of their own, did not hold on as long as anyone expected. We were ready when they and the people of Afghanistan watched their own government collapse and the president flee amid the corruption and malfeasance, handing over the country to their enemy, the Taliban, and significantly increasing the risk to U.S. personnel and our allies.
I'm afraid we've just lost Michael O'Hanlon. So, Ambassador Omar Samad, let me put that question to you. The president here in the United States, President Biden, he's been taking a lot of heat on this withdrawal and the manner in which it was carried out. And the White House seems to have a problem, actually, dealing with the criticism that it has been taken. They've been trotting out a string of officials over the past 2 days to try and seize the narrative back, to try and paint this as some kind of accomplishment, as some kind of success. How do you see it?
I think this is a temporary political hiccup, serious one, obviously, but something that I think this administration is going to recover from. Obviously, a lot will depend on what happens in Afghanistan from here on. The humanitarian crisis is going to be watched very carefully, the aftermath of the U.S. withdrawal. But I think it's sort of natural to expect this issue, especially what happened with the evacuation of the airport, the focus, the media focus on Afghanistan and on the humanitarian aspect around the airport, the killings that took place, the suicide bombing, the loss of 13 American soldiers and hundreds of Afghans. All of this obviously has created a frenzy across the board, and there's a political cost. And I'm sure that the opposition groups and parties, not only in the United States, but also in other countries, are going to use it, and they're going to sort of ride the wave, the public sentiment wave. But I think that this is, within weeks and months, this could be managed, and it's going to get back to normal.
Michael, great to hear that you're back with us. We've been talking about the intense criticism that President Biden has been coming under for the manner in which this withdrawal was carried out from Afghanistan. And as I was saying, the White House appears to be having a problem with stemming this criticism and turning the page on this. They've been trying to do it for the last 2 days. Is this a problem for the White House?
Greetings, and thank you for your patience with my video feed. It is a problem. However, I would be surprised if it becomes fatal to the Biden presidency. We know that at a similar time in his presidency, Bill Clinton had Black Hawk Down, you may recall. And that was not something that the country was frustrated by after a 20-year saga. That was more out of the blue. And in that event, President Clinton certainly took a lot of lumps for being a unseasoned, not particularly effective first-year president, but he won re-election and he wound up being seen overall as a pretty good president. And Mr. Biden may wind up on a similar trajectory if he can now stanch the bleeding, if he can prevent the development of a narrative that somehow he is too irresolute or too distracted or too disorganized. But my own guess, even though I disagree strongly with his decision, and I believe we should have stayed in Afghanistan, my own guess is that politically speaking, this issue will not be the decisive one in his presidency or even in the first 2 years. I think COVID recovery and relief, the broader state of the economy, and how we get along with countries like China, these will ultimately be more important questions. So unless the Afghanistan question somehow bleeds over into issues like the U.S.-China relationship, I do not think that Biden will be unable to escape its consequences. I think he'll be able to move on.
Michael, you say the United States should have remained in Afghanistan. You disagree with this decision to pull out. The United States had already been there. The United States and its allies, I should say, have already been there for 20 years. What would have changed?
I don't know what would have changed, but I do know we had reduced the burden by 95%. We were down to fewer than 5,000 U.S. troops. In fact, we were down to about 2,500. And even if we had plussed that up a little, it still would have been a modest military presence. And we had already about a half dozen years of doing okay in terms of casualties, in terms of maintaining a military stalemate with a few thousand U.S. troops, maybe closer to 10,000 for most of that time, but in the same general region. I can't tell you what would have changed definitively. Maybe Pakistan would have decided to be more cooperative in the peace process. Pakistan was starting to be at least a little more cooperative beforehand as things stood. Maybe more Taliban leadership would have turned over. Maybe we would have had to stay 10 or 20 more years. But you know what? I think I would have preferred that to the Taliban ruling the country. Now, I hope to be proven wrong. I am encouraged by the Taliban's rhetoric. And while no one is going to accuse them of being, modernizers or reformists, I think that it's possible the Taliban will moderate compared to how they ruled 20-some years ago. And maybe this will turn out not so horribly. But right now, I'm quite worried. And I do think if we had stayed, we could have prevented this takeover. We could have given the peace process a chance.
Mohammad Naciri, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Well, the Taliban have won, and now comes the hard part. They're going to be having to run the country right now. And one of the biggest concerns is the future for women in Afghanistan. The rights for women, for girls in the country. Will they be allowed to go to school? Will they be allowed to go to university? Will they be allowed to take up jobs, professional jobs, etc.? Will the UN be working with the Taliban on these issues?
As Michael rightly said now, the statements by the Taliban have all said that there will be a place for women and girls under the ruling, and the protection of the rights will be preserved under Sharia law. We still need to understand exactly what is the unpacking of the Sharia law means. The United Nations and UN Women is there to stay. We have our teams on the ground, the internationals are on the ground. And when the time comes that the United Nations have a dialogue with the Taliban, we will have women and girls at the center and at the heart of these conversations to make sure that women are part of the governance and the government, to make sure that the access to services is preserved, to make sure that we continue working on ending violence against them.
Well, that's the very nuanced part of that pledge from the Taliban, saying that the rights of women and girls will be respected within Sharia law. But for the UN itself, regardless of what Sharia law stipulates, what would you like to see?
Exactly what I have just said. Basically, women to continue to be active in the public life, not only the political, but also the economic and the social. That women do exercise the right to access all services, health, education, legal, etc. That women and girls live a life free from violence. These are really the main pillars of our engagement with and for Afghan women and girls in Afghanistan. And these are the ones that we will continue to have a conversation with Taliban in Afghanistan about.
Okay, let's go to Beijing, to Qinduo Xu. Qinduo, great to have you with us. There is much commentary in the Western media about how China will be among the big winners from this American withdrawal. Afghanistan, some analysts say, will fall under China's sphere of influence. How does Beijing see this?
Well, China is just like other countries, very much worried about stability in Afghanistan. Among that is really the potential terror threat. We know somehow because of the U.S. departure, there could be the terror organizations could be emboldened, and there could be a comeback of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ETIM. And somehow Afghanistan could again becoming this hotbed for those terror organizations. We know there's a suicide bombing against the evacuation. And then we know there's estimate, about ISIS, the numbers, some say a few hundreds, some say about 1,000 of them. And what we don't know, what's the next step for them, and what kind of relationship they are going to have with Taliban, and is Taliban able to drive them out of this country or control them, to give up their plans to launch further attacks against the U.S., against China, against Russia, or against India, say. Any regional countries, I think that's the number one concern. And after that, of course, you would love to see a stable, politically stable country, economically stable country, and socially, there will be a stable Afghanistan and the leadership, let's say, of Taliban-led government. That would be the best. And that will be in the interest of China, in the interest of Russia, and in the interest of every other countries, I would say. Right, that is the challenge right now. We don't know.
Yeah, China wanting to see stability in Afghanistan is understandable, as other countries want to see as well. But how soon do you think, or will China extend its development aid to Afghanistan in the short term?
Well, we are expecting to see, obviously, there's a political support from the Chinese side. That is like, if there's an establishment of a new government, let's say inclusive government led by Taliban figures, I think international support or encouragement or even guidance for the new government to do, to be moderate and to pursue those moderate policies, that would be easier for them to gain international recognition. And then there will be probably humanitarian assistance, economic assistance from countries like China to support the government to ensure there is a normal operation of the government and of the society. Because obviously there's economic hardship, there's a lack of jobs, there's a shortage of daily supplies. So this country is actually new challenges just started for the Taliban after the U.S. withdrawal. And that's the harsh reality. I think they need a lot of support. In that process, China can play a role. But when people talk about BRI, when people talk about economic projects, investment from China, I think that's still back along this priority list.
Right. BRI, of course, is the Belt and Road Initiative. Ambassador Omar Samad, looking at that address that President Biden made earlier on Tuesday from the White House, one couldn't help detecting there was a little bit of anger in the president's voice. It kind of sort of bordered on the defensive as well. He mourned the deaths of U.S. servicemen who were killed in that bomb explosion at Kabul International Airport, the U.S. servicemen who were injured in there as well. But he didn't mention the 170 Afghans who were also killed in that explosion. In fact, he talked about the impact to America. He called it, the cost to America over the last 20 years. But the Afghan people have also paid enormous costs in these 20 years of war. They've lost tens of thousands of people. Should he have perhaps been a little bit more contrite, perhaps shown a bit more humility in that address?
Sure, obviously, but he's the president of the United States. He did mention about the losses that the Afghan army and the military have endured over the years. The numbers in terms of Afghan civilians and Afghan military personnel lost in the past 20 years is over 200,000. The Americans, including the contractors, is close to 7,000. And plus about 1,500 other internationals who have been killed in the war. He also mentioned the $2.2 trillion. He also went into an area that I thought had not been addressed properly in the past. He talked about the cost to America. He talked about the cost to the families. He talks to the cost to the veterans. And he also mentioned something that really touched me. He talked about as part of the PTSD and the after effects of war, of 18 young Americans taking their lives every day because of these wars. This is staggering. This is something that should touch every human being. And this is the American part. Now just look at what this means in Afghanistan. What does it mean in a society that has seen 43 years of war, in a society that for the past 20 years tried to rebuild itself, tried to find peace, but they were spoilers, they were warmongers, they were people who benefited from war, who did not want this war to finish. They wanted to continue this war, but look at the human impact in America, in Afghanistan, in so many other societies.
Michael O'Hanlon, is this war really over for the United States, or has it entered a new phase right now, one which will be fought from the air? We hear the new designation that they call it now is over-the-horizon warfare. So this is a war which will be conducted by drones, by pilots in aeroplanes flying at very high altitudes. In fact, Afghans reported today that there were U.S. airplanes circling Kabul for most of the day. Does the United States really have to have boots on the ground?
Well, first of all, let me thank you and the panelists who just preceded me for very moving comments about the human toll of this conflict, which I think on all sides we need to honor and continue to respect. So let me just express my solidarity with your thoughts. In terms of our ongoing involvement, you're also absolutely right to say the war is not over. And perhaps we can do things from overhead and from the region, but the region doesn't seem that interested, right? We've already heard from most of the neighboring countries, and they don't want American or other allied capabilities on the ground, whether by way of intelligence gathering or certainly any kind of active counterterrorist capability. So I think we're going to have to try to do things with aircraft and unmanned aircraft flying from the Persian Gulf and Diego Garcia and the Indian Ocean. These are all places that are far away. They're all places that require overflight of other countries' airspace. And so it's going to be more difficult. And, it's one of the big reasons why I oppose the withdrawal. But we are where we are. It's August 31st, September 1st already in some places around the world, and like in China. It's a brand new phase to this conflict. And the next phase is going to depend crucially on testing the proposition that the Taliban have offered, that they want to govern in a more moderate way and they want to grant amnesty to their previous opponents. We have no choice but to explore that possibility. I don't necessarily assume any given outcome or sincerity, but that's the next phase of this struggle, because the airplanes that you're talking about flying overhead, They can only do so much for counterterrorism, and they can do very little for the well-being of the Afghan people.
Mohammad Naciri, this withdrawal by the United States has also triggered a massive refugee crisis. The airlift has stopped, the evacuation has stopped, so now there are thousands of people streaming to the Pakistan border. Will the UN be involved in accommodating these refugees? In fact, Pakistan has already said that they can't take any more. There are already 2 million Afghans who live in Pakistan, and they say they can't take any more refugees. So what role is there for the UN?
For UN Women, we will definitely be working to support the Afghan women and girls wherever they are, either inside Afghanistan or outside of it. Our experience with the Syrian crisis and the camps in the Zatari in Jordan and the Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, that we've been supporting the women and girls there to reskill, to have safe spaces, to attend to the issues of violence against them. So when the time comes that this happens across the border in Afghanistan to Pakistan and other countries, UN Women will definitely be there to support. I am not aware of what are the discussions that are happening now between the relevant agencies like the Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and neighboring countries, but UN Women definitely will be there for the Afghan women and girls.
Qinduo Xu, I've got about a minute left. President Biden talked about withdrawal, of course, but in that same address on Tuesday afternoon, he also talked about threats coming from other quarters. He mentioned China, he mentioned Russia, and it's Biden's view that the U.S. needs to face these threats and not get bogged down, as he put it, in places like Afghanistan. But how does China view this kind of rhetoric, this kind of speech coming from the U.S. president?
Well, you know, the U.S. Basically is their priority. Obviously, is about their national interests. And but when it comes to Afghanistan, there is common interest for these big powers, U.S., China, and Russia, because terror threat is a real threat. We are talking about a weakened U.S. ability to control, to tackle those terror threats. You know, Senator Graham talked about, you know, afraid of horribles, a chance of 9/11.
Right.
You know, of course, we don't want to see any kind of terror threat like that. But how can you stop that? How can you prevent that kind of potential from becoming true? That would be a huge challenge.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Time has caught up with us. Thanks to all of you for being with us. You've been watching The Heat on CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu. Thanks for watching.